So today we'll only talk a little bit about the different kinds of libraries, especially for people who don't have time for libraries. And the very idea of the library is interesting to me because it means that time somehow becomes slower inside libraries. And because sometimes also when we walk into the thrill of a library and spending time there, we also get bored. These are things about the libraries that we don't know how to talk about. Clearly there is one thrill to the library in that we like going and sitting there, or we like imagining ourselves sitting there with the books and uninterrupted reading. I don't know what uninterrupted reading means anymore, because as I've come to realize, the biggest interruption to reading and writing is me. I start reading a book and then I'm very tempted to open my phone. And over the last, I think, a decade or so, it's become very difficult to read. I don't know how many of you resonate with this, but I haven't been able to read a lot at all in the last decade, and it bothers me, but it also doesn't bother me that much because I'm in touch with it in some form or the other. I'm going to make you feel bad by telling you how much I'm in touch with it. So the thrill of a physical library is very painful for me, because when I was in my undergraduate in Bangalore, in Jain College, this was a college that looked like a hospital. I've said it before. The students there were patients, the teachers there were also patients, all of us were patients. I was in love with a boy, so I didn't really see the library for the 3 years there. I discovered lots of about the city from the back of his bike, so I was very happy. I didn't really care about the library or reading that much, but I like to call myself a writer in my head. But the thrill of being with this boy was so large that it felt like I didn't need reading or writing, and that thrill was enough when I was growing up. When I graduated is when I went to collect my marks card or something, is when I discovered that the library was on the first floor of the campus. And I felt a little uncomfortable that I had never actually stepped inside the library. So I went in and looked at all the time I could have spent there, but didn't. But it didn't make me feel bad because this boy was still in my life. And now that he's not, I get to sit and whine about it and say I should have just spent my time in the library. But I come from the generation where there was TV, so library wasn't very big. My parents, on the other hand, came from times where there was no TV and also there was no library. So they also don't come from a time where we read books because we didn't have TV. They didn't have either of these options. My father reads a lot, and so does my mother. He is in a government, he used to be a government official, so every time we got transferred into a new city, the first thing my mother would do was go and locate a local library. I think because she was also a housewife and she knew what it was to kill time very slowly, she started making friendships with books. She read a lot of Kannada romance novels, and the covers of these novels were always a housewife in her sari in the kitchen, and in the back there would be 2 men. This is very fascinating to me. I couldn't tell what the story was from the cover, but the cover looked very exciting. It never occurred to me how she managed to read Kannada for 1 week like that. She just kept reading, and every week she would go and get a new Kannada romance novel. My father, on the other hand, read important looking books like Lives of Tigers and Elephants and Kushwant Singh and things like that. The one time that I found a very erotic book on his bed, it was called Men, Women and Sex in Kushwant Singh's Life or something like that, and it had a picture of a woman and her back. She was lying down naked on a bed and her back was seen. And he'd kept the cover removed, so he kept the cover under the bed and only the hardbound of the book was visible. And I went snooping around because I saw one brown cardboard, and then I looked under the bed and the cover was there, so I got very thrilled. But I discovered that my parents had a strong reading life after I saw them with these books. I still don't make sense of what they were getting out of these books, but it just thrills me no end that they're very respectable people who read kitchen romance and then Kushwant Singh's romance and things like that. It gives me a kick somewhere. But my own reading life was very shameful, because I told you, because of this boy that I was in love with. I like blaming him. But I think I felt a big stab about how much I hadn't read when I became a teacher at 24. I stepped into the classroom, and this is a classroom where students were sometimes my age, sometimes younger, but not very young. They were about 18, 17, and they'd read every other book in the whole world. And it made me very afraid. And that's when I started cursing my boyfriend a lot. If it weren't for you, I'd have read at least 2 books. If it weren't for you, I didn't read a single book in all those 3 years of my graduation. That's why I felt it sting me a lot. But in the classroom, I think I started reading because I was always competing with my students. I had to be faster, I had to know answers, I had to appear smart, I had to make up for something that they were looking for but they couldn't find visibly. Because I'm short, I'm not what you'd call a teacher, because teachers are tall and have long hair and they wear nice saris, and I didn't look like that. So I had to make up, somehow I had to convince them that I may not look smart, but I am actually very smart. I may not look like I've read 100 books, but I have. I didn't know how to pull this game off. So it started out as a competition, and I don't know how it happened accidentally. I think in the process of trying to convince my students that I was really smart, I actually enjoyed reading. It happened accidentally. I think I started reading accidentally. It wasn't purposeful, it wasn't deliberate. I think I had settled down pretty much with this boyfriend. I wanted triplet girls and twin boys. I had made my entire map ready for the next 40 years. I had no interest in reading, no interest in writing. But I think being in the classroom for so long with so many of these students gave me an alternative vision, wherein I could see myself not just in one world, but in multiple worlds. And this is also a time when I was becoming very insecure with love and life. I was constantly, this boyfriend of mine had started working at 16, so he was all the time at work. And he would not receive my phone calls, not respond to text messages. And I kept thinking, what is this life he leads where he can ignore my messages? I also want a life where I can ignore his messages. So more than wondering what was happening in his life, I wanted a life where I could ignore people. Then classroom became that world, because it was for 1 hour when I was in the classroom that I couldn't look at my phone. So I'm here today to argue that a classroom is better than a library, because in the library, if your phones are allowed, you will look at your phone. In the classroom, I can't look at the phone. If I look at the phone, teaching doesn't happen. Then students start using the phones. If I look at the phone more than anything, I will lose my job, because there are CCTV cameras in the classroom also. So the classroom is a better library in my life, because it's filled with students who made me want to read more than a library ever did. And not just, it began as a sense of competition, yes, but after a while, I think I started reading because I needed an excuse to talk to some of these girls. These were girls who were quiet, sometimes very talkative. In the beginning, it all began because I wanted to impress that really cool girl in the classroom. And I thought, what is my fate, even in school, when I wanted to impress the best girl in classroom. Now I've become a teacher, even now I want to impress the best girl. Where is my life going if I only want to sit and impress these girls in the classroom who may not even look at me, who may not even think about me? It began there. And I started picking up books because they looked intelligent or smart. And then little by little, I started falling in love with what I was reading. I felt arrested by what I was reading, because every time I encountered a sentence in a book that made me realize that I had forgotten the real world, it made me want to be more involved in this other fake world I'd built for myself and ignore the real world. And the thrill of it became even more acute when I was so lost in the things that I was reading that finally the day arrived when I could ignore my boyfriend. When that happened, I didn't want to look back ever. I didn't really want to be without a book. But it's a hard journey, because in this, if you put a young teacher in a classroom with her younger students, the students will always win, and which is a good thing. Students should win, especially against teachers. And in the classroom, I think because I also grew up very sheltered, my parents kept me sheltered from the city, from everything in life. It felt like I didn't have enough things to talk to them about. And when I started reading, it looked like these were some things I could point them to. For the first time, I felt very helpless was when a girl sat at my table crying because her friends hadn't invited her out for dinner or something, and she was crying. And I didn't know how to help her. So I started talking to her about a book, and then I said, in this book there is this girl who is drying bed sheets, and she's putting these bed sheets on some rope, and then she just starts flying into the heaven, and she just flew into the heaven. This girl, in the middle of crying, she looked at me like I was mad or something. She wanted to slap me, because she was very seriously crying. It was a graduation time, and she could be out with her friends having dinner, and I'm trying to tell her the story about some woman in Latin America trying to dry bed sheets but flying into heaven. What was I trying to do? I had no idea. But she said, "What book is this?" And I showed her the book I was reading then. It was 100 Years of Solitude by Garcia Marquez. It's a scene where a woman named Remedios is ascending into the heaven. And then I had read simultaneously that the image that Marquez used to write this scene was, he once saw his neighbor drying bed sheets, and the wind was so fierce that it looked like the legs had become part of the bed sheet, and she couldn't see her legs anymore, so it looked like she was flying into the heaven. So I told her these two images, and she looked very stricken by it. I myself wasn't really happy about these images. I was, at that point when reading Marquez, I wanted to slap this man, because it was my 5th time reading him, and I wasn't able to make sense of what I was reading. I think I held on to that book because I wanted to finish reading it, not because I was enjoying it. And then she picked up the book and she said, "Okay, do you mind giving this to me only today? I'll come and give it to you tomorrow." I said, "Okay, take it." I had done enough showing around with it, so I had no intention of giving it. My job was done, a girl was talking to me, so I gave her the book. She said okay, she took it and went away. She came back next morning and she said, "I got a library copy, I'm very interested in the book, thank you so much." And in one night, she'd read about 200 pages more than I had. And I felt a little upset, and I wanted to hide the book, because I was a little mad that I gave her this book and she'd read more than me. And it also meant that she doesn't need me now. That's what I was competing with. She said, "I'll come back to you after I finish reading, let's both read this together." I said, "Okay, fine." And then she went away and she read the book, and then I would return to the book every now and then. And she came back after she finished reading the book, and she asked me if I had finished. I was nowhere close to finishing it. She said, "Please finish it, I want to talk about it." Before she could finish it, or before I could talk about it with her, she graduated and then she left, and this story remained incomplete. But in the next semester, I carried this book again. First day of college, I'm sitting again at my table trying to finish this book. I finished it that evening, and I missed her very much, because this was before she had a phone and things like that. We weren't really in touch. But the last 2 lines of the book made me want to talk to her very much, and I knew exactly why she was looking so wild that day. And then it occurred to me that now it occurs to me that reading essentially for me is an excuse to talk to people. Even though people say things like books are better than people, you have to sit with books, you'll forget people and things like that. And once the classroom has become the library, the students in it become the books for me. So after 100 Years of Solitude, I started reading another writer called Sandra Cisneros, who wrote very beautifully about things that she'd seen and things that she'd heard. In a line of a short story called Salvador, she says, "Salvador with eyes the color of caterpillar." And every time I've taken this short story to any other class, there'll at least be 5 or 4 students who are very puzzled with that line. And they'll want to write like her. They'll want to read more things by her. And this is a thing, as a teacher, if you take one short story to a class and one student falls in love with it, they will become your teacher and read 5 books by that author. And this pisses me off, but it's also great because my job is done and they'll really get better at reading than I can ever be. But so the argument that I'm making, why classrooms make better libraries than libraries ever will, this is another example. All it takes is one short story to start a whirlwind of romance inside the classroom, between students, between one student from this class to another student from another class. And this is the other secret joy of becoming a teacher. I become like a fly on the wall. I get to see exactly what is happening between 2 people. I get to see who's not talking today or who's talking today, who's sitting next to whom today. These are the other things that don't happen in a library. That's why classroom is a better library for, is this my 3rd point, 4th point? I don't remember, but just keep some tab in your mind open. Library 0, classroom 5, let's say 5. The other things that I realized about the classroom, some of these things may not be true other ways because there are students who feel more alive in the library than they do in the classrooms. 3 years ago, I taught a student who told me that when she first came to college, she was so terrified of the college and the classroom and friends and people because she had no friends. She would look for empty classrooms to have lunch in. And she said she made friends with the empty classroom, and she was very puzzled with how in 5 minutes after the bell rings, everyone will start come here and the nature of this classroom will change. But for now, it's just so quiet, it's just me having lunch. And she took to reading like not many people before her had. She came from a broken, what people will say broken family, but every time any other friend used the word broken to describe her family, she would just get very upset. She said, "There's nothing broken about my family, you should meet my mother, she's a superwoman," she'd say. Her mother is a PT instructor, and she didn't have very much money to spend on books and things like that. So every time she would come to college, she would take one book from the library, finish it in a week and then give it back. She said she felt very lonely in the first year because she would look for empty classrooms to eat lunch in. But once she started reading, she said it didn't really matter whether the classroom was full or empty because she said she'd found a world in which to just throw herself into. This girl, I followed her life very closely, and I became very jealous of how much reading she was able to do every day. So this is the girl I introduced Sandra Cisneros to, and by the time I finished teaching them, she had finished reading about 4 or 5 books by Sandra Cisneros. She was eating books. And I've seen a lot of girls who come from small towns do this. They don't know the city very well, they're very afraid of the city, they throw themselves into books and they eat the books. Another girl, much like her, who wanted to leave the course in the first few semesters because she didn't know the language, started eating books like these. And by the end of the 3rd year, she was able to fight off all the bully boys in her class with just language, nothing else. Earlier, she used to be terrified of even speaking Tamil in the classroom. But once she was reading English books, it felt as if her connection with Tamil became sharper and brighter. I don't know how that happened. I thought it will help her with English. But she comes and tells me that I can speak in Tamil much more freely after reading in English in these classrooms. And there was a boy in class who was saying something opposing Jallikattu, I think. And she comes from the land where she's seen all of this. And this is a boy who had a panache in his arguments, who was very political and things like that. She got pissed off after a while and she yelled at him and called him Moodevi in front of everybody. And then he didn't know what to do because this is the first time he's he's hearing her speak like this. Until then, her Tamilness no one really knew about. Even she didn't know that she could be that Tamil in the classroom. What prompted it, I asked her one day, and she said, all the books that I've been reading in English, it's making my connection with Tamil stronger, because I find that essentially all languages are the same, whether they're Tamil, English, Kannada, whatever. And what I'm essentially looking for when I'm reading a book is a way of not missing home. And I think I was missing home so much even when I was reading English, that after a while English, Tamil, everything became same in my head. And that stayed with me. And I'm telling you all of these student stories as also a way of filling this space, this room, with all of these memories that I'm carrying of these girls. For a large part of my life, again, teaching became very scary because of all the other kinds of students in the classroom who were not necessarily there to learn or to do anything, but just because they had to be there because their parents had money. And they had very little respect for life or for each other. It was very visible in the way they would walk into the classroom every day. Becoming a teacher will teach you also this one other thing. It will teach you how to observe how people walk. And it's a prejudice even I don't like about myself, but if you walk in a certain way, I might want to throw you. I don't know why that happens. If you walk in a, I don't know if I'm asking for students to make themselves smaller. If I am, maybe that's something that's not very nice. But if I see a boy who is, let's say, built very strongly and tall and things like that, and if I see him walking a certain way inside the classroom and banging the door open, immediately my body will just crunch inside. And I'll want to show him his place. Something I'll want to do. I don't know what showing somebody their place also means, because it's that moment I realize I am the teacher. I'll want to show my power and say, you walk in, you stand there and ask me if you can enter the classroom. That I'll want to say. But there'll be some other boys who will walk in and not ask permission and all of that, but still walk in with some sense of, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, and walk in like that. I'll fall in love with them. This started happening a lot in the classroom, and as a teacher, libraries, there is a big library in my university now. Earlier this college used to have a small library in the basement, and it was a very darkish kind of room, and I used to go there as a student and spend some 1 hour there, because in UG I didn't go to the library. In PG, when I saw the library, I thought, okay, this is my life. It's unfortunate that in my own university now there's a huge library with lots of natural light and fan and sofas and everything, but I think in the last 1-2 years I've gone there twice, and I think once I went there to charge my phone. It doesn't speak very well of me, but classrooms are also spaces where it becomes possible for students to walk in and find one version of themselves that they can live with. Is another exciting thing for a teacher. I'm talking about girls and the students more than the books themselves, because as I've told you, I haven't read in a long time. The other reader in my life was my sister, who read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen about 14 times. Wow. I never understood why she was doing this. She was a science student. So already my nose is up in the air thinking, why is some dabba science student sitting and reading? I am the literature student. I have not read Pride and Prejudice even once. I teach English for a living. Jane Austen was on my syllabus at one point. I have never read Pride and Prejudice. But I'm trying to get at how worlds work here. She did her BSc, then she did engineering, then she did some chemical engineering, then she did lots of things. She also did IAS at one point. Now she's in Germany. I don't know what she's doing. but she read Pride and Prejudice 14 times, and every time, so she had this ritual. Every time she finished reading Pride and Prejudice, she'd start reading it all over again. And I didn't understand what was happening, and it made me very jealous because every time I told somebody else that my sister is reading Pride and Prejudice, they would say, "Oh my God, I only watched the film." And I had not even watched the film. I had not read the book, I had not even watched the film. So my sister was sort of leaving me behind in every way and just going ahead like that. And this was a book to begin with that was on my syllabus in Bangalore University for the second year. It was a purple color Rupa Classics book. It had a picture of some Victorian looking woman on the front like that, some small edition book like that. But she read it cover to cover, and now and then she would suddenly start talking in one Jane Austen kind of language, and that would irritate me a lot. She would learn these big words and throw it at me, and she would say, "Darcy would not say that," and things like that. And in these occasions I would side with my father very much because he had a big contempt for all English books. He was also reading English. He was reading in English very late in his life. By the time he found English, I think he wanted to read English books as a way of talking to us. You see, circle of life, whatever. But every time she would say things like, "What would Darcy say?" and things like that. My father would say to me, "Avaraman Darcy yaru." And then it's a, I don't know how to translate that. Can you translate that? How will you say Avaraman Darcy yaru?
Who's that? MF or Darcy?
Avaraman is not MF. He would say that. I would side with my father because I felt like, okay, he's not impressed with this English book and all. So what if it's on my syllabus? He is saying that means that I'm still winning in life. But I asked her one day why she likes reading this book so much. And she told me that she's learning how to kill people with one word. I didn't know how to respond to that. It was very scary. She's 2 years younger than me. She sounded so smart at that point. I became very afraid of her. When she said she's learning how to kill people with just one word, and reading that book is helping her how to do that. And I wanted to know what this is about. But I read 2 pages of that book, and there were long sentences. Where is the word? I didn't know. I wanted to kill her. She lied to me. I don't know where this word was coming from. One sentence would begin in page 1 and end in page 5. I have not still read Pride and Prejudice, but I think what she was getting from that book was this ability to win conversations with men. And that made me very curious about what was happening in her life that she felt like she wanted to learn how to win against men this much. So I thought, what a colorful life she leads. At one point, she hit a very bad time. She didn't know what she wanted to do. But I had this secret desire to tell her, you should leave all of this science nonsense and just do an MA in English. But I'm lying there. I never actually told her that because I knew she'd be very good at it. That's why I never told her that. But in my mind, I knew she'd be an A1 MA English student if she ever came into any course, because she'd read and live books and learn things from them, and she'd maintain a book where she'd write about the things she'd learned, and I would go and sneak in on her and read this, and too much competition in my head. I spent the rest of my life, I think, trying to catch up to women like this around me, it always seemed like they were getting something from the book that I couldn't. And I would be so put off with the first page, but they would just go in, and 5 hours later, they would act as if their world has changed. That inner quiet, inner calm, the way someone sits, all of this that they get from books, I wanted that, and it seemed like I was never going to get it. I felt really unsettled when I noticed that her life went from, she was a big reader, and then she did engineering, and then she wasn't reading anymore. She hit a wall, and then she didn't know what to do in her life. She did Wipro jobs, and then she tried to do IAS, then eventually she went back to engineering. But what I noticed was that she'd stopped reading. And I didn't know it would make me that sad. I always thought she'll be #1 enemy in my head. But it made me very sad that she'd stopped reading. So to reignite some reading thing in her once, she would read these self-help books at one point. And then she got into some reincarnation type nonsense. So it scared me that she was reading all of this because I thought I was going to lose her. My father once caught her reading "Who Were You in Your Past Life" kind of book. And knowing the kind of language that my father uses, he scared her and threw that book away and made sure that she never goes anywhere around it. From some money I made from some scholarship somewhere, I thought I should buy her a Kindle. And I bought her a Kindle and I gave it to her and I said, "This is for you." And then I opened it 10 days later to see all kinds of C++ books on it, some engineering type manuals. I got very cheesed off. I wanted to yell at her. I said, "Why are you not reading your Pride and Prejudice type books anymore?" She said, "I don't know, it's just gone." And this is also to show you that when people get it as easily, they can also lose it just as easily. And it's one small time tragedy that it happened that badly with her. She never got back into reading like that after that. She still does. On her phone she reads some fantasy books and she reads a lot of fan fiction. All of that is great. I'm not saying Pride and Prejudice is good and fan fiction is not good. That's definitely not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that something about her that was so magical in that she could just forget everybody and be with a book for 5 hours, it dulled after a while. And I think I'm blaming engineering for this, so that I'll blame fully. Whether it's engineering or science or something happened to her and then she never went back. So it scares me to think that it's possible, that you do live in a world where something can get your own gift and you won't call it your gift because you don't know it's a gift, will get taken away from you one day and you won't realize it and other people around you will realize it. It's very scary. It's scary to think that it could be your superpower and right when it was going to be your superpower, it got snatched. And now you don't know how to get it back together. Needless to say, that Kindle she never used, so I took it away from her and gave it to this student of mine who was eating lunch alone in classrooms. And she made better use of it. She reads like 2-3 books in a day. And whether or not she reads 2-3 books in a day, I'm just glad that that relationship with reading is always there. After all of these stories that I've given you, I'm hoping you see here. See, I'm one of these people who will make one plan in my head and then I'll come to the event and then I'll say 5% of it and then I'll step back and see I've given them this design but I haven't really connected the dots. So the connection, even I don't know what is. I'm giving you the dots, you see how you want to connect them. Okay, so you play this dot line game with yourself. I'll only give you dots and go today. So how many dots have I given you so far? 7 dots? Okay, fine. I'll give you 2 more dots and then we'll end it, okay? Okay, 5, 10. 2 more dots. Carmen Maria Machado. Have you heard of this lady?
Yes.
On Halloween, some 10 years ago, a colleague of mine sent me a short story on my mobile and said, "Read this short story." It was called The Husband Stitch. I started reading it and then I got very scared. I got scared because it was written very well. And I do that sometimes. When I read something that I get very terrified of, I keep it away for a while because it gives me pain. I'll want to write like that, but knowing that I can't, what else can you do? So you keep it away and then just not look at it. That's what I did. This is a short story that moved me in many ways. It's a story of a girl who is a writer, who's telling you the story of what happens to her sexually before marriage, after marriage, gets a child, is in a very boring heterosexual relationship, but the way she talks about it is even makes boring heterosexual relationships look very exciting. That's how she talks about it. And then something happens in the end. It just basically her head falls off in the end. Yeah, I'll just tell you. I won't give you any context. So you'll want to go and read this story. So this Husband Stitch is a story of a young girl who falls in love, has sex, gets married, has a child, and then her head falls off in the end. Okay, that's the context of Husband Stitch. I was very smitten with this story, so I took this story to all the classes that I was in. This was when I was about 26, 27 years old. And I noticed that every time I took the story to a classroom, students would look at me as if I'm very intelligent.
Finally.
Yeah. But it was a fluke. I didn't know how to tell them that, but they associated the story with me so much, they started acting as if I had written that story. And I started enjoying it very much. I enjoyed it because finally, even though I wasn't writing, students were recognizing me as, that association happens for students. Now this is the other thing, they're very innocent like that. You take one story, they'll associate you with it so much that no matter how bad or ugly you become after that, you'll always be beautiful to them in their heads. And that's the best part about teaching, that this association you can live with. Essentially that's what pays you more than anything else, that association. Now what did this association do to me? Every time I was taking this short story, it would I wouldn't know how to teach it, so I would just read it out. And this is where I think some students also started catching my fluke, which is that this teacher doesn't do anything. She comes to class and reads the stories out. That's all she's actually doing. She's actually not discussing stories with us. She's not offering theory. She's not mentioning, there's no critique happening. There is no intellectual rigor. Where are all the Foucaults and all these other theorists with very difficult names? I shouldn't be saying this sitting here in Goethe, but all of these big theorists, where are all of them in her classroom? But she just comes and reads the stories out and she goes. But I loved reading the stories out. So Husband Stitch takes about 40 minutes to read out loud. And if you're reading this story out loud in a classroom, it's a lot of performance. It's a lot of performance because the writer is also telling you how to read the story. The first line of that story is, if you're reading the story out loud, read these parts in such and such a way. And then it continues from there. So I became a performer when I was reading this story, not so much a teacher. And I started enjoying it very much because of this allure that some students had in their mind that I'm very intelligent. But it became very risky now. If I take a very promising short story like The Husband Stitch, written by some white woman sitting very far away from me, I must also match it up by saying something intelligent about it. Now I had nothing intelligent to say except to convince students that this was the greatest story I'd ever read. This is the question, is that enough? If you're teaching the students in this world where there is social media, there's Twitter, they are very intelligent people, is that enough? Is it enough to leave the classroom with just having told them this is the greatest short story I've ever read? That's all. In the beginning, it seemed like it was not enough, and I always had to at least make them feel like, no, I have more to say, it's so complicated that you people may not understand it, but it's there. All of this is happening. After about 2-3 years, I think I gave up. I gave up wanting to become very intelligent because I realized that the students who wanted what they wanted from that story would get it with or without me. So I am not going to rely on my intelligence anymore to make them feel like I am intelligent. Let them arrive at it on their own. I'll just leave them with the short story and run away. Now this is the 8th dot, why classrooms are better libraries. I'll give them the short story and then they map out their lives based on one short story. The short story has changed many people's lives, and not because I took it to class, although I like to believe that I changed their lives. The short story changed their lives because they were able to recognize someone they could be in that short story. I'm just giving you one example. There are hundreds of other examples like that. So it's like a cascading effect. They saw the story and they wanted to read other stories, they went and read other stories. Some of them have modeled their lives around the stories that they've discovered in the classroom. And what is a better library than that? If you can live for about, let's say, 2 weeks with just the thrill of one sentence you've discovered in the classroom, I don't know anything that can match that kind of high. So there, those are the dots, 8, 9 dots, 10 dots, 11 dots, 11 dots. I don't know how many dots. But the last story that I will, last dot for today is my own story of not just what I take away from the classroom as the library, but who I become in the classroom. I have now finally become the person who doesn't always wonder why someone is unavailable, because I become very unavailable when I'm in the classroom, but at the same time I'm so available to all my students in the classroom. Nothing comes close to that kind of thrill of being locked in a classroom for hours together. Even though bell rings after 40 minutes, I still feel like the energy in the classroom, once I go in and come out, it gives me a new version to live with. Like in the morning, I'll get yelled at by my father for something, and I'll go to the classroom and I feel like no one has yelled at me today. Where does that come from? How is it that I'm feeling so powerful in the classroom? When the pandemic happened and we were all taking online classes, I loved online classes. The physicality of the classroom, even though I missed it, and I know many teachers who hated online teaching, but I loved it. I loved it because it felt like the best part of teaching, which is the classroom, I have in my home. And I don't have to deal with college, signing in, signing out, attendance. I don't have to deal with any of that. It was just me and my students, even though I couldn't see their faces. It still felt like magic that I was locked in my room for 40 minutes every day like that. And at home it was madness of all kinds. Every time I would tell my entire family, just shut the hell up, I'm teaching for 40 minutes, don't open their mouths. They'd all keep really quiet, and at one point I would look leftwards and they'd all be standing like that, staring at me. And it never occurred to me why they were so fascinated with my teaching life until I saw this, which is that for them also, in front of them, they were seeing me materialize into somebody else. They know me as somebody who throws tantrums, who won't make tea when they ask, who does this, does blah blah blah. Basically, they only have complaints. And then in the next minute, they can't complain about anything in life because I'm not available, even though I'm right there. They can't disturb me. Coming back to the physical classroom after this was all kinds of thrilling, and I do this habitually. I've been a teacher for about 11 years now. Every time I walk into a classroom, I make it a point to close the door. I close the door not because I don't want students to come in late and things like that. I close the door because I feel like students are allowed in, but any non-student has no permission to come to my class. When I say non-student, I mean things like people with authority in the education, other teachers or the principal or the vice principal or somebody, your colleague, anyone. No one has permission. It's just me and the students, you get lost. It's like that. So the thrill of locking like that, I sound like a pervert at this point, but locking the classroom and then just, this is you and this is me, and now we will read a short story that is going to change all our lives. That conversation changes me a lot. No library, no book has the same power of this, of locking the room and just sitting with students and this is the short story I want to read today. This is the poem I want to talk about today. Because I start saying one thing and then they tell me 100 other stories after that. That's why essentially when I leave the room, I'm also carrying all their short stories inside me. I think that's where the punch comes from. I was reading Hilary Mantel, Wolf Hall, which is the first of her 3 books. It took me 1 year to finish reading this. Earlier, I used to love finishing reading books at just 1 day, 2 days, like that. It's only now that I'm recognizing the value in reading a book for 1 year, 2 years, like that. Because this is the kind of book where I know I have read every sentence with my full body inside it. And everything that she is giving in the book, I'm just taking. I'm trying to look at what reading Hilary Mantel did side by side when I was teaching. It's a very expensive book in terms of what it does to your mind, but every time I would read a sentence that I really liked, the only person I wanted to share it with the most was the classroom. And but how does this happen in a classroom when there's a set syllabus and portions and things like that? In that way, a library is much more free molding, no? Like you don't go there with a syllabus and say you can only take, in the library you can take anything you want. If I'm modeling my classroom after a library, but where any student can come and take any book or any short story that they want. What a zeal. So that is the last story I wanted to tell you, the last dot. A few years ago, a professor of mine told me that the classroom is like a playground, that you basically go there to play games with students. And it's only now, thanks to Nimi and Shiva, after this conversation, that I'm also realizing that it's a better library than a classroom, because there's no telling how the students get to move the teacher and how the teacher moves the students. Nobody can control it. That's what I really like about it. So there you go. Classrooms are the better library for today and for tomorrow.